Alrighty, party peoples of the interwebs, if I look a little red in the face as though I've gotten too much sun, I have, because I woke up this morning and the kids said, "Can we go fishing?" And I'm like, yes, we can. And the fishing was so good, they said after we ran out of our first 36 minnows, "Can we go back to the gas station and get more?" To which I said, yes, we can. And we had a smashing day of success. I might show a video or some pictures of our success. It was amazing. All right, but it's Sunday, and it's about 3 hours, give or take, until our Viva Barnes Law extravaganza on the interwebs, the bestest law show ever. We're going to talk about Trump's gag orders, Trump's Cohen testimony, all the other stuff that happened in the news in the week with your big brain Robert Barnes, who's amazing. What I do on this channel, if you don't know what I do, and if you're new, welcome. I talk about some fun law stuff. And I like to bring to the attention some of the stuff that is already in the social consciousness and some stuff that you might not have heard about, which is what this reminder advertisement vlog for tonight's show is going to deal with. Coming out of Canada, we all know of these protests that have been raging across campuses across the US and across Canada as relates to the conflict in the Middle East. I'm going to be 45 this coming week, and I have lived long enough now to have lived through at least two other such flare-ups in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the First Intifada and the Second Intifada. The Second Intifada was, give or take, 2002. And for those of you who don't remember, it's the same cycle that sort of plays out over and over again. There's an act of terrorism, an atrocity, and then there's fear and condemnation of the inevitable reprisal from Israel. It happens over and over again. It's the cycle of the Middle East. Back in the Second Intifada, it got so bad there were protests all over McGill, not so much though as much as Concordia University, where Gad Saad is a tenured professor. Back in 2002, there was such conflict on campus that Benjamin Netanyahu, who was actually scheduled to speak at Concordia, could not speak. They protested and boycotted the presence of Benjamin Netanyahu, and 20 plus years later, we are where we are. October 7th, an atrocity beyond atrocities. I've still got my questions as to how on earth it happened, how on earth it happened at the scale it happened, and how on earth it happened at the scale it happened for the duration it happened. We don't have those answers yet. What we have is all hell breaking loose in the Middle East. People, again, condemning the response from Israel even before it happens, but because they knew what was going to happen, notwithstanding the atrocity of October 7. That's what happened. And now you have protests raging across campuses across the US, people chanting in the streets from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, raising the debate as to whether or not that is a chant of genocide, whether or not it should be outlawed, and I do not think it should be outlawed, whatever it means and whatever people understand it to mean, because I don't think a great many people chanting that have any understanding as to what it means or its history. Set all that aside. There have been protests across campuses, preventing kids from attending their classes, arguably harassing some students. I've seen the videos. I'm just reluctant to write off all of the protests based on certain videos that go viral on social media. We've seen the videos that went viral on social media as relates to January 6th, where people take those incidents of violence to characterize the entire January 6th event as an insurrection. There is undoubtedly student harassment going on. There is undoubtedly acts of violence, acts of destruction, taking over buildings, smashing windows, harassing students, undoubtedly. Whether or not that is characterizing all of the protests, I'm sufficiently cynical that I wouldn't go that far, though I do have no doubt you would not catch me at one of these protests trying to interview students. There are a lot of people with black lock, I think it's called, black umbrellas. There has been smashing, there has been assault, there has been harassment, etc. They have gotten so problematic that at McGill, and they've had protests on McGill campus for a little while now, we in Canada have made the news yet again, and not for good reasons. Bad videos coming out of Canada. All right, McGill is my alma mater. That's where I studied honors philosophy, where my thesis was in deontological consequentialism. I'm still trying to find my thesis. I need to find my thesis, but set that aside. I went to McGill University. We've always had, some protests, never quite as bad as Concordia. That was the difference between McGill and Concordia. But now it's everywhere. Concordia again, because of what's going on in the Middle East, and McGill again. There have been encampments established on campus, pitching tents. Not just there. You've seen it across America, across Canada. Literal encampments. They're pitching tents. They're buying tents, setting them up. They've got their chazes and their chops and their no-go zones and yada yada. They have something similar at McGill University in Montreal. And it's been sufficiently disruptive that McGill took an injunction to try to get a court order enjoining the dismantling or enjoining these encampments, ordering the dismantling of these encampments. And it's actually been the second injunction. There was one taken by 2 students to order the removal of these encampments, which was dismissed. McGill took an injunction or filed for an injunction, and it was rejected. A judge said, no, you haven't established the criteria that is required in order to obtain an injunction at the provisional or interlocutory stage. Now, the criteria very loosely, I think there's 4 criteria. The color of right, meaning that you're going to succeed on the merits, irreparable harm, balance of inconvenience, and I forget the 4th. It doesn't really matter, but you have to show 4 criteria in order to obtain an interim injunction, which is a court order ordering the cessation of a certain conduct. McGill says, look, this encampment is disruptive. It's going to risk the convocation ceremonies, like the end of year ceremonies. It's a health hazard. It's a fire hazard. And that is the urgency. That was the other criteria, urgency, to get the injunction. And a judge of the Court of Quebec, it's the Superior Court of Quebec, said, no, you haven't proven urgency. You haven't proven irreparable harm. And you haven't, well, the balance of right, I'm not sure how they adjudicated on that. The balancing of the First Amendment, freedom of association, it's not really First Amendment in Canada, but the freedom of association, the right to protest, versus the right of McGill to have students access the campus freely. But a judge rejected the injunction and said, no, McGill, you didn't prove urgency, you didn't prove irreparable harm, because you said, oh, this is going to interfere with our convocation ceremonies, but you've also adduced evidence that you found a different location, a different venue for your convocation ceremonies, so there's no damage whatsoever, at least as relates to the convocation ceremonies. You're going to do it somewhere else. You've already proven that, showed us evidence that you've rented a different venue. It's going to be safe, secure, and so this is not interfering with graduation ceremonies. As relates to the danger, the risks of this encampment, I think they actually argued like fire hazards, risks of evacuation. And the judge says there's no evidence that anyone's been hurt, harmed, or any risk whatsoever from these encampments. And so they lost an injunction ordering the removal of these encampments, and this encampment is going to now continue on the campus protesting. What are they protesting? The demands of the protesters are that McGill cease any relations, or what's the formal word where you stop doing business with any entities related to Israeli institutions or Israel the state. It's a little bit wild and it's a little bit audacious. I mean, it takes a little bit of gall for students to start dictating at a provincial university level international policy. It's bold, it's audacious, and I won't get into the intentions, even though I think the intentions are somewhat questionable because this is the latest iteration of the current thing. First COVID, masks, vaccine, Ukraine, and now it's this. I won't attack intentions because you never know what the intentions are. I'll only attack the obvious hypocrisy. Imagine, whatever you think of the state of Israel, whatever you think of it, imagine saying now we're going to boycott, protest, make hell for McGill in order to dissociate themselves or no longer do business with anything related to Israel. But China, well, that's no problem. Now, I'm going to go get my iPhone. I'm going to go get my iPad, my computer. I'm going to go get all my shoes made in China. I'm not going to order anybody to stop doing business with China because I don't care about those peoples. I don't care about those human rights violations. Let's even assume that there are bona fide human rights violations. They don't care about China. They don't care about Syria. They don't care about oil. They don't care about where they get their oil now that Canada has stopped producing, or at least cut down production on Canadian soil and has to go begging to Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. They don't care about that. It's myopic, one view of the world. Israel bad. China, who cares? China, what can I do about China? I can make hell as relates to Israel, but say bub when it comes to other acts of atrocities committed by other countries with whom we frequently do business and from whom they frequently consume products. So there's the element of hypocrisy. This is now the third flare-up in my lifetime, and it'll do exactly what it does every other time. Eventually, social consciousness and these people who protested this, the same way they stuck on the banner for Ukraine, the same way they put on their little emojis for face masks for COVID, they'll move on to the next thing. Things will level out in the Middle East. Maybe there'll be some discussions, maybe there won't. Maybe Benjamin Netanyahu will in fact face some consequences for what was, at the very least, and at the most generous, the most monumental, cataclysmic intelligence failure in Israel's history. At the very most charitable interpretation, that's what it was, and people should still be held to account for that. And at the most nefarious, something much, much worse. We'll see what happens. But the bottom line in the interim, injunction rejected. Now they're going to move to the merits, presumably, unless there's some other urgent situations that come up that warrant revisiting the refusal to grant the injunction. The encampment shall survive. The protests shall survive. And that's what's coming out of Canada. And I will see you now. What time is it? We've got another 2.5 hours. I got to go cram, do my homework so that I don't look stupid during tonight's show. If you like what I do, make sure you are liked, shared, subscribed, notifications turned on, vivabarneslaw.locals.com for the best above average law community out there. More importantly, exercise, eat healthy, sunlight, talk to people in real life, and now you know you vlog. See you in 2 hours, peeps. Booyah!